From over here to what happens in Washington, easier to detect that because we're not so used to everything. But obviously, whether you would vote Democratic or Republican made no difference. Wall Street always won, and Main Street always lost. So I think this is not just about wealth or distribution of wealth. It's also about this feeling of not playing a role. And the third dimension is about respect. And I want to share a little anecdote about Pope Francis, who as a parish priest in Argentina was once supporting with his parish a prostitute that was raising her kids as a single mother, raising her kids through prostitution. And the parish would always send some presents to the family on Christian holidays. And one day the woman comes to see the priest and says, I want to thank you. And he says, well, did you like what we sent you? And she said, yes, of course, but that's not why I'm here. I wanted to thank you that you always say Senora when you address me. And this attitude of not being neglected, of not being spoken down to, this expectation, that plays a major role. The New York Times, which is the most important newspaper of the East Coast intellectuals and liberals, discovered the typical Trump voters the day after he won the election. On the day after the election, they first spoke about Appalachia and the hillbillies that they had completely ignored. And if you talk to a typical West Coast or East Coast intellectual or liberal person, they just talk down to these people. They're called white trash in the US. And I think similar things are happening here, where there are some attitudes and every one of us should challenge ourselves to which degree we're part of that, where some lifestyles that we don't share are not respected. And people are not happy with that. Look at the political elites. I recall the day when there were ordinary workers or old trade unionists or playing leading roles. Now look at who is still a craftsperson or an ordinary worker having a leading political role, who has not gone to university. I think there are some connections between the shape of our political elite, who they encompass, and the question whether these elites pay enough respect to all kinds of citizens. And I think these two elements, power and respect, come on top of the distribution issues. And these three elements are undermining the stability of our order.
When I go back to your question, you said who explains Europe. And you answered it is a part of to be a politician to explain how Europe works and how is it only their duty? That's my question to the panel. Or do we have other people who is responsible? Whose responsibility is it to speak about Europe like you did? You did very enthusiastic talking about Europe and why it is good. You talked very enthusiastic from different view. You said Europe is very good. Whose responsibility is it?
guess that politicians cannot be alone here. Not only because there are not too many, but because they are not sometimes not trusted, because they are considered sometimes to be part of the problem. So I guess it's not enough. I very much, and also I want to say that negative attitude, not here, not about elites and establishment, but against EU, was very much created by the politicians. By the national politicians. In Prague, I call it fairy tale about a nice and kind Prague and nasty Brussels. You have the same fairy tale about nice and caring Berlin and bad and spoiled Brussels. That is obviously not true. Who is making a decision in Brussels? We are making decisions as people elected in countries, and your prime minister or your minister. So this was actually a very important part of the problem that we are now facing. This was created patiently, step by step, for many years. I guess what's important is to have on our side. First of all, I believe that more people understand. Easy is to convince them. So education is absolutely essential. And it's not by accident that the Eurosceptics, for example, are very strongly protesting about teaching at school about history of European Union. Because they understand that if people understand better, they will be more receptive and more enthusiastic. The second, I guess, point is very important influencers. But I consider that it's extremely important to have a good civil society. Because civil society in well-functioning countries have sometimes very strong credibility, because they are not fighting for power. Politicians, they are considered as someone who is fighting for power and will do everything in order to get the power. But sometimes the civil society is very credible, and it's not by accident that some regimes that tend to more totalitarian way of governing are very strongly against the civil society, because they think that the civil society will undermine their plan. So there is no quick fix without the education, without people teaching the critical thinking, being able to distinguish between what is evidently truth and what is evidently false. Civil society, we will not create a stable improvement. So I guess everything together.
So I just have looked at my watch. The time is nearly finished for our panel, but maybe you have just one sentence for our last round.
Thank you.
Probably you've heard of the famous or infamous Gina principle. There is no alternative, which is very popular in speeches and talks of politicians when they want to justify something they have decided. So there was no alternative. Normally I take this sentence very critically, but I think for Europe there really is no alternative. And going back into the diversity of nations and countries, and even waging wars or looking jealously to the other. And so I simply cannot imagine a 21st century without the European Union. And so coming back to this book I opened my talk today, why Europe will run the 21st century, I'm not really convinced that Europe will run the 21st century. But for the countries in Europe, there will be no 21st century without Europe.
Oh, that's a good word. Before giving the last word to Reinhard Bütikofer, I will give you, the audience, the last chance for a last question or a last remark. There is a lady.
My question would be, with the upcoming elections, if you could have a realistic wish list for what should happen with the next European Parliament, what should be on top of the priority list, what would be your on the top of your wish list? A realistic wish.
A realistic wish for Europe.
Yes.
Okay. So that's a question for the future of Europe.
I believe that we first have to demonstrate to European voters that we do have the tools to solve some of the issues at hand better than we have so far. Makes no sense to go into theoretical debates about how Europe should be constructed hypothetically in the future before we regain more trust by delivering to the citizens. And I think we have to deliver on a couple of fronts that are quite obvious. We have to deliver, and I'm not ranking the issues now, but we have to deliver on the security issues. Europe has to contribute more together to our common security. What that implies is not easily described. As, according to my opinion, we're wasting a lot of money by spending stupidly because we don't use the competition mechanism when we have public tenders for the defense industry. And the EU Commission has calculated that member states could save between 25 billion and 100 billion per year if we would work more effectively together in that sector, which seems to imply a great promise. But however we do that, it's obvious that we cannot rely on the rest of the world providing for our security without contributing ourselves. So there is an issue. Second, obviously the issue of migration and the asylum system. Until 3 years ago, most of the Europeans believed this is not a European issue. This was supposed to be a national issue, and the Dublin system still upholds the illusion that it's a national issue. So if the asylum seekers come onto the Italian shores, that's Italy's problem. That's not realistic. We have to find a common policy there, and it's very hard to move towards that because this is one of probably the most obstinate issues. I would advocate that we show more flexibility to contribute around Europe, but not necessarily does everybody have to contribute in the very same way. Also with regard to climate policy, we have had policies that allowed for burden sharing between different partners. Not everybody had to contribute just the same. And I would insist that everybody plays a role, but why shouldn't we be more flexible than we have been? Third element, I'm sure that Europe has to come up with a new industrial policy. It's for a long time, industrial policy hasn't been much of a public topic. Now I get the perception that this is changing. Altmaier has said so. CDU has said so. SPD is saying so. We've been trying to say so for a while. I would be very happy if we would understand in Europe that not every country can pursue its own industrial policy, only if we organize a common European industrial policy based on the value chains that we have all around Europe. Then we can stand up to the competition. So that's the third priority. And that includes, in particular, digital and eco-efficiency development. I think they could go well hand in hand. I think digital efficiency could help environmental policies and the other way around. The fourth issue that I would emphasize would be external trade. It's been mentioned shortly. Europe should play an active role in promoting fair and free trade. Not just free, not just fair, both elements, fair and free. And this is where, as this is already a European competency, we can have a major impact. So I think that would be important. And number 5 is about, this is about probably the most difficult, this is about the social pillar. We can argue that this commission under President Juncker has successfully put the social dimension of Europe back on the agenda where it was missing for quite some time. But we have not yet been able to implement that meaningfully so that the citizens see what's in it for them. And I don't think that we can have just a one-size-fits-all social policy for all around Europe. But why don't we have European legislation that says in every country there has to be a minimum income according to the different national conditions of which people can, well, feed their families until the end of the month and not just a few days before that. And there are other elements like youth unemployment that we should focus on. And I think we could do more on this in this dimension of Europe. So these would be, for me, the 5 most important priorities. And on top of that, we are, of course, confronted with the development where some member states don't want to adhere to the rule of law. And I believe in this case, we cannot just rely on the European Parliament or the European Commission. Unless the member states really put their own efforts behind that battle, it will never succeed. If we lambast Mr. Orban from the European Parliament and the European Commission just the same, and the governing party from Bavaria always keeps inviting him and applauding him, then he will not believe that we will really draw red lines in this, or draw lines in the sand that he will not be allowed to cross. If the member states don't stand up for the same rule of law principle as the European Commission and the European Parliament, then he might just continue. So in that regard, it's not just an issue of the next European Parliament and the next European Commission. The greatest power in Europe still resides with the national parliaments. And I think we've seen over the last 10 years the absolute necessity for the member states to take ownership of European progress.
Yeah, we have already 6 bowls on our Christmas tree or election tree. And now, what bowls would you like? 1 or 3, 1 or 2? Because I think do you have one? One, you have one, yeah.
Complicated, especially after I said thank you, and this should be the end. But I will rather compliment from the more general point of view, because it is that next elections will not be about how many of these balls on Christmas tree will actually materialize and how many will be missing, but it's about more essential things, about issue if there will be sufficient majority of parliament members who will be in favor of developing and further improving functionality of European Union, the way that it will be beneficial for Europeans, or if there will be majority of people that want openly or less openly get European Union on that spiral that is leading to the end. And this, such a fundamental question, will be on the table. Because I guess there are two sets of people two sets of reasons why people are skeptical about European Union. Some people believe that European is doing too much, not very much understanding that this is not European Union, Euro bureaucrats in Brussels, but these are the ministers and the MPs that are deciding such a way. But the second group of people, quite important, that believes that the European Union is not helpful because it's not solving the issue. If the European Parliament will be blocked or will not be able to take decisions and agree to agree on compromises, how to move forward, then this second group will get bigger and bigger. And this is one of the way how to lose the trust. And as I said, that if you lose the trust for something, the future is not very much bright. So I guess this is the most fundamental question.
I have only one point on my wish list for the upcoming elections: a high number of participation, a high turnout, because it's all about legitimation and that the people feel that they decide and that they are responsible for the future of the European Union and of the European Parliament.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for the panelists and your comments and the kaleidoscope of European Christmas ball for the Christmas tree, I just called it. And thank you, my thank to the audience too for joining us this evening. I think now I have the honor to invite you in the name of the Sächsische Aufbaubank to invite you for a glass of wine and a little snack just by the door. And I wish you a good way home afterwards. Thank you, and please go voting.